Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. Today we have our MAC legislative team joining us, per usual, for the most part. Well, Michigan has finally experienced winter, I think. We've got snow on the ground. We've got sub-zero temperatures. So I think everyone can now stop complaining if they were about snow for snowmobiling, skiing. There should be ice pretty much on the lakes for ice fishing. So we're well into winter now and looking forward to the end of it, as many people are, I'm sure.
And we also have a winning football team.
And we do have a winning football team. So go Lions, great win on Sunday. Tampa Bay up on the clock this weekend, opening as a 6-point favorite. The Lions are, which is a big number. Don't love to see those big numbers, but we did beat them 20-6 earlier in the season. So expectations are high, I think, to make it to the NFC Championship game. Not jinxing it, knocking on wood right now. So but 3 o'clock Sunday, I'm sure a lot of people will be glued to the TVs. Did anyone watch it this past weekend?
Yes, sir, I did.
I did as well.
That was fun.
It's a good game.
And a shout out to our Packer fans, most of them in the UP.
Yes, true.
They had one heck of a game too.
That was very well could see a Packers Lions NFC Championship game. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, well, war inside the state, but it'll be fun.
That would be, yeah. Well, let's jump right into it. We're starting legislative session. Did have some session days last week. Not much was done legislatively. I think we've talked a lot about the dynamic in the legislature right now. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be focusing on the upcoming year, some of our priorities as we move through this legislative session, election year, of course. So that impacts things. When we're working with the legislature here in Lansing, you've got a tied house in the legislature caucus wise. So we'll have to see how that impacts. But let's talk about some of our priorities. First up, revenue sharing trust fund. I think obviously number one, something we always talk about, especially as we work through the budget season. This will impact that potentially, but these are separate policy bills that have to do with that we've talked about numerous times. So Deena, why don't you give us a brief update on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Steve. Our members who have listened to the podcast in the past will, probably heard our recap of 2023. But in November of 2023, these bills that create the revenue sharing trust fund passed out of the House by a vote of 106-4. They have been referred over to the Senate Committee on Finance. So, right at the top of our priority list, securing those general fund dollars that get appropriated out to counties each year for their revenue sharing, it tops our list of priorities. Although I think it might still be a little bit of an uphill battle because it does carve out a portion of the state sales tax and cuts into the unrestricted funds that the legislature uses to fund all kinds of different departments and programs. It is still a huge priority, though, for many members of the legislature, both House and Senate, Republican and Democrat, as seen by the vote coming out of the House. So hopefully we get, some movement on this early this spring. I think that there's a significant potential for it. Can't hear you, Steve.
Sorry. Something we've talked long about is the revenue sharing trust fund. So no surprise there. Something we'll be working on, hopefully with the dynamic in the Senate not changing, we should be able to see some movement on that sooner rather than later, as opposed to things that might get held up in the split House. So let's move on to the veterans property tax exemption. Again, another issue we've talked long about, worked on for many, many years. Something that is important to counties as that number continues to grow from two standpoints. Obviously, the reimbursement from the state is important, but we also don't want to impact those veterans that are already getting that benefit of that exemption. That's important to us as well. So Deena, is it you or Madelina that kind of wants to talk about the disabled property tax exemption, or primarily you?
If it has the word tax in it, that means it's me.
That's what I figured.
That's what it means.
And thank God for that.
Yeah, so this is the issue of the disabled veterans property tax exemption, that was adopted by the legislature back in 2013. And when they first adopted this policy, they thought it was going to cost somewhere around $18 million across the state. And they thought that local units of government could absorb those losses. Well, this is a very popular program, and we've seen it grow exponentially since its enactment. And now we're looking at somewhere around $100 million a year that comes out of local government coffers to, in money that we're not receiving from these property taxes. So we've been seeking a solution to this for many, many years. There's been a whole host of ideas on how to raise the revenue or carve out the revenue to reimburse local units of government for their losses without, like Steve said, without impacting the disabled veterans who are receiving the benefit. A couple of those are reimbursement, a refundable income tax credit that could be payable to the local unit of government. Some of them talked about using poll tabs to pay for this. I think, regardless of the policy that's adopted that does provide some reimbursement, MAC is going to be supportive of it. We've worked with veterans organizations, with legislators on both sides of the aisle, and understand that this is a priority for several of them, to get this policy done. Again, gonna say the hangup is tying up state general fund dollars to reimburse locals for this loss. And so we're gonna see a little bit of pushback, I think, from the state budget office on this topic, unless we can figure out how to actually raise additional revenue to pay for it.
And Deena, refresh my memory. Do we have bills introduced to do that right now that are sitting out there?
Yeah, and I could go through them, Steve. There's probably 8-10 different bills right now.
Okay.
That do it. And like I said, they're bipartisan, bicameral, with slightly different approaches to all of them. But coming up with whichever solution is going to be the most comprehensive, the least damaging to the veterans, and the most expedient, we're gonna kind of tend to lean in that direction.
Okay, great. All right, let's talk a little bit about trial court funding, an issue we've talked long about here at MAC, going back to the Trial Court Funding Commission that came out with 7 recommendations many, many years ago, pre-COVID. Work was done to kind of implement those changes. COVID hits, things get slowed down, fall apart. We have an election, so a lot of moving parts since the recommendations have come out. Important component of those recommendations was funding. And of course, currently counties are allowed to charge fees for that, but we are looking at a potential sunset coming up, right, Sam? When we start looking at trial court funding fees. Okay.
No, but thank you, Steve, for the background on trial court funding reform. So yes, after a series of sunset extensions, we're at the point now where we have yet another, which is quickly approaching May of this year, with it being an election year, even split amongst caucuses in the House. We're not too sure that a lot of policy is going to get done, at least in the next few months, that is. So with that, and the May date upon us, 4 months isn't a whole lot of time to implement all of the Trial Court Funding Commission's recommendations. So our plan is to extend that sunset to May of 2026. It was 2 years from now to implement those recommendations. Representative Leitner has already introduced a bill this year to extend that sunset to May of 2026. And hopefully between now and then, we'll get a work group together and enact those funding recommendations.
Now, I know in the past they have put some caveats in there of requiring work groups or requiring certain things in order for that sunset to be extended. Is that the case in this piece of legislation?
In Representative Leitner's bill, nope, just simply extending the sunset. Now, there are conversations around other bills that might require a work group to get together, but as of right now, just a simple extension.
Okay, good to know, good to know. All right, another topic that we've talked about in the past and don't really have a ton of information on it, but it is something we want to continue to focus on is infrastructure funding. So Madeline, tell us a little bit about what's being discussed, what's being looked at as far as infrastructure funding going, specifically, for those county roads, bridges, and infrastructure projects.
Yeah, so Michigan is currently facing a $3.9 billion deficit annually for roads and bridges. That number is going to continue to grow as electric vehicles and high efficiency vehicles grow in popularity. On top of all that, the governor bonded for roads back in 2020. That was a 5-year bond, so those are going to be expiring soon. So 2024 is really a critical year for finding solutions to the road funding problem. The governor's Population Growth Council also just made some recommendations that improving our infrastructure could help attract and retain some more people. So yeah, MAC's a part of a couple different coalitions to explore various revenue options for road funding, and I think we're going to be hitting that issue pretty hard in the next couple months.
Now, is there anything being talked about? You talked about some of the challenges in funding decreases due to electric vehicles efficiency. Are there other funding mechanisms being looked at from the standpoint of how to kind of solidify that, whether it's, different registration fees or vehicle miles traveled? Are there pilots out there being looked at? Anything there you can talk about?
So the ultimate goal, yes, is to transition Michigan away from a reliance on a motor fuel tax. And yes, there are many options being explored. There's tolling, there's vehicle miles traveled. There's raising the gas tax, there's raising the sales tax and allocating some of that specifically to infrastructure. I mean, there are a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of things to explore. As far as the miles traveled method, there are 19 states already doing it. So while Michigan was once considering a pilot project, other states are already out there doing it, so we can use their data if that is something that we decide to move forward with.
Yeah, that would make sense. If they've been doing it longer, they probably can use some of their information. Well, something I'm sure we'll be updating folks on as things move throughout the year. But like you said, it is a critical year as we start looking at those bonds expiring and other ways to fund infrastructure. All right, moving on to another topic that's kind of general in nature, but we do always it is concerning for counties, and that's increasing services for juvenile justice. Now, we kind of have a general statement out there. Sam, do you want to talk a little bit more specifically about what we're looking at in that area?
Sure. As far as juvenile justice goes, we had the massive package that was signed by the governor at the end of 2023, and that did do a lot to reform the system. However, there are a lot of other residential facility issues that have yet to be addressed. I know that the governor has a task force out there to address the concerns as far as the bed and staffing shortage goes in residential facilities. So at MAC, we'd like to see a few things happen. First, increase funding for staff, whether that's, additional staff people, increasing the wages that they're paid, and then also funding for at least one publicly operated facility, particularly in northern Michigan. We have two different issues really. Downstate, there's enough staff, but it's difficult to retain them, right? So with the staff shortage, it's led to a bed shortage. Now, in northern Michigan, in the UP, there's not a facility at all. So that is a legitimate bed shortage. They either have to send kids downstate or to other states. And obviously that's not good for the rehabilitation of these youth and, re-entering them back into society. But also, for county finances, it's not the best way to go to have to send kids out to Washington State or Nevada when there's not placement here in Michigan for them. So really the only way to fix this moving forward is funding. The policy's there, it's reform the system. Now we need money to fix the bed shortage.
Now, when you're talking money, are you saying more allocated resources from the state to the issue within their current budget? Are we talking increasing taxes for it? Are we talking about federal funding? I mean, what are we talking about specifically?
I don't know that a tax increase is necessary, but increased state funding to county governments would be crucial. Wayne County, for example, is really struggling to fill their residential facility with staff. Last year, the House DHHS budget included 25 million for a facility in, I think it would have went in Grand Traverse County. That would have opened up 32 beds in northern Michigan and would have serviced over 20 counties. So if we could get additional funding from the state to counties to operate facilities or open additional facilities, that would really resolve the issue at hand.
But yeah, I'm sure we'll see more of that obviously as we work into the budget session this budget year right now. We'll see some more, see how that goes with the budget recommendation. And speaking of that, Deena, we did just have CRAC, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference, come out with the first of this year's projections. Since last May, of course, you know, they'll do another one in May of this year, 2024. But this is kind of the initial one where the governor will take a look at these numbers, put her budget together. That budget recommendation will go to the legislature, and then they'll begin working on the budget for fiscal year 2024, 2025. Excuse me, this is the initial swing of it. So Deena, what do we see in this first CRAC that came out last week?
Well, you know, we didn't see anything shocking. You know, we didn't see anything great. We didn't see anything really bad either. We were under the impression that revenues were going to be projected to be down, but they're projected about flat from what we were expecting last year. So not a whole heck of a lot of changes. I think the biggest difference, though, is that we're not going to have anywhere near the surplus that we were dealing with when we did the last budget cycle, or a huge amount of federal dollars that helped supplement a lot of the projects that were funded in the last budget cycle. You know, do I expect a lot of belt tightening? No, I really don't. But there's also not going to be the, you know, Christmas tree full of gifts that were, you know, in the last fiscal year budget. I just don't see that. There may be. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, if you remember last year's budget, there were a lot of specific projects that were funded across the state, and counties were beneficial. A lot of counties were beneficial of those individual projects as well, and we benefited with an increase in revenue sharing too. So, you know, yeah, I think your analysis is right on there as far as what we can expect.
Yeah, I think that, you know, the money that they had to spend last fiscal year was a lot more flexible than necessarily what they're going to have this year. Although general fund revenues are kind of consistent, overall budget kind of consistent. The only additional piece that I think we need to pay attention to is a bunch of the IIJA money that's going to come down. So that's Investment, Infrastructure, and Jobs Act. And I think they're going to be able to focus some of that a little bit more on different types of infrastructure projects. Not necessarily, you know, big business incentives for, you know, individual special projects, but more infrastructure. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the governor recommends when she does her budget presentation at the beginning of February.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. You know, we've got the state of the state next week, and then typically a few weeks after that, we see the governor's budget recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
And then typically they start meeting a little bit and start talking about budget. And, you know, last year it was, you know, kind of later in the spring session till the budget got done, which is not uncommon. It's pretty typical, but it was a very condensed time period. If you remember last year that budget got done. So it'd be interesting to see this year how that plays out as we move towards that. I guess you could call it official July 1st deadline. While there's no penalty if they don't hit it, but it is nice for them to get it done by then.
I think, you know, I think the political dynamics are going to be pretty fun to watch too, because last year, remember, the Senate Democrats and the House Democrats were really in charge of budgets for the very first time. And they had, you know, to just, although, you know, many of the members are serving, you know, in second term or third term or whatever it might be, there was still a whole heck of a lot of learning process to be able to run the budgets and negotiate with the state budget office and the governor's office and individual chambers. So I think this year with a little more experience under the belt might go a little smoother.
Yeah, we'll see. We will see. So, all right. Well, great. Does anyone else have anything before we sign off for the week? All right. Well, thank you all. Everyone, I hope everyone has a good week, and go Lions.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.